This episode was recorded October 7th, 2025. Today, the architect of Project 2025 in studio with me to talk about how he plans to take down Senator Lindsey Graham in next year's Republican primary. In our discussion, Paul Dance lays out his vision for America. I'm Nick Reagan, and this is We the Palmetto. We talked to Low Country voters. Trump was in true campaign form. Voting is officially underway. Joe Biden spoke here in the heart of downtown.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce you with your title, your association, all of that. And then immediately after that, I'll turn it over to you so that you can fix anything that I might have said that was incorrect. So are you ready?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's do it. All right, I've got Paul Dance with me. He's the architect of Project 2025, which was the roadmap for President Donald Trump's second term, even though it was widely panned by the left and even distanced from by the president himself. But much of that project is now in the works in the federal government. Paul Dance is now running for Senate against Lindsey Graham. Mr. Dance, thanks for coming in.
Nick, thanks for having me.
All right, how'd I do? Did I get it all right, or what do we need to
that's
correct?
all correct, yeah.
All right,
So
good
he
deal.
worked at I worked at the Heritage Foundation for 3 years, overseeing that, and previously I was a Trump administration official. Worked basically the last 10 years to make sure Donald Trump got elected from 2016 to present.
Well, and he did get reelected. Let's talk about, though, one of the things that you guys have been putting out on social media right now is that the latest poll, which perhaps you can help us out. I don't know who actually did the poll, if you have a source on that, but what the poll said is that you guys are kind of surging up to around 22%, up from less than 10 back in June. First of all, poll source, and then secondly, what do you think those results tell you about the people, the voters, the Republican voters here in South Carolina?
Sure. The poll source is the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, big data poll. He is known as one of the most accurate in the nationwide polling. He called all 7 toss-up states right in 2024. So he's a national poller. But look, it's great for us. We launched July 30th, almost two months, and have shot up 13 points. Lindsey Graham continues to drop like a rock. He's now in the mid-40s, and Mr. Lynch as well went from 10 to 4%. So the poll is very positive. We have just beginning to get our message out. Tell people about what this campaign and that there is an end to Lindsey. This is in sight. We're going to take him out, and we're going to bring that Senate seat back to the people of South Carolina, rip it out of the hands of the deep state, and really put, like you say right here, of, by, and for the people. This is our government. We need representation in Washington. That what I'm standing up for is God, family, country, and that's how the majority of the viewers watching this live their lives, and that's why I'm going to Washington.
Of course, that poll does show that Lindsey Graham more than double where you are right now. Of course, there's still a lot of campaign to go, but how do you bridge that gap? How do you unseat someone like Lindsey Graham, who's been doing this for a long time?
Sure. Well, his numbers are terrible for any incumbent to have under 50%, and like I say, he's falling. Lindsey's his own worst advocate. This guy's out clamoring for endless war. This is not what we want. He wants to put boots on the ground in Iran. The man wants to bomb Gaza into a parking lot, nuke them, he told a bunch of pastors. He's just completely disconnected from the way we live here in South Carolina, and it shows. He does not care about life here because he doesn't understand it. He left the state 32 years ago and moved to Washington. He never took time to raise a family. He doesn't know. And that's important. Why? Because, all these issues he's never stood up for. He's never stood up for medical freedom. He's never seen how broken the schools are. He's never waited in traffic out in Somerville to get into town like an hour. How can all this happen? Because 30 years of neglect in the state, our roads are pretty much the worst in the union, but that's because we have a senator who's never cared. He's always in Ukraine. He's always in Israel. And he's taking this $300 billion that we could have used some of it back here at home and just shifting it into the pockets of oligarchs.
Well, we're going to talk about Ukraine and Israel and what you think we should do here in just a minute. But first, President Trump has endorsed Lindsey Graham, to my knowledge, and Graham's a close ally to the president. You're also a close ally to the president. But from your perspective, does Trump just have it wrong on this case?
Well, first of all, President Trump did that long before I got in the race, so I wasn't even on the radar. With Trump, that's one of the things Lindsey Graham has done. He extracted that almost in the way of extorting that endorsement. He sat on the budget committee and he had the president's entire domestic agenda on his desk. And he said, hold up, Mr. President, before I put this into law and put it in front of the Senate, and he held the president hostage for that, essentially. So he said, endorse me and whatnot. The president had to do it. Our polling shows that the majority of people believe that President Trump did it just to move the agenda along. And, the result also is basically none. People here in South Carolina have had enough of Lindsey. It's time for him to move on. Look, he was booed in his own hometown of Pickens for 6 minutes straight. People literally turned their backs on him. That was in 23, happened again in Somerville. In 24, it happened again in Columbia. The bottom line is the people, we have his number, and the act is worn thin. We know he cannot be trusted with Donald Trump's legacy, and I'm the proven fighter. If you like what Donald Trump's doing now, I spent the last 3 years making sure that this admin was ready to roll day one. So you name it, everything from reinstating service members who were kicked out because they refused to take the jab, to deconstructing the Department of Ed, to making these universities answer for what they've done in terms of stopping free speech, the debanking. You go anywhere, all the way from what they're doing with the environment and the Paris Accords, shutting down our coal-producing plants. We made energy a big thing. Without free, abundant, available energy, our industry will collapse. We have to rebuild this. So I've worked for President Trump, and it's shown that I fight for him too. I fight for us back home, and that's why I'm standing up to Lindsey Graham.
Well, listen, anybody who has a plan for fixing the commute from Somerville to Charleston definitely has my ear. I mean, I tell you what. That's an hour.
We don't have to live like this anymore. Like, you do not have to live like a refugee in your own state. This man has been here 30 years. They could say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing, thinking the result will be different. Stop voting for this person. He is done with the state. He has basically a thinly veiled contempt for us back here at home. And he says so on the Senate floor. He's like, my state often does the worst things. And he reverts. This is a guy, if he had his way, there never would have been a Donald Trump. Let's back up. He said, you want to make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell. And then when Donald Trump won, he went around and said, the Russians did it. He was the one painting this Russia narrative of Russian hacking in the 2016 election. What he wasn't doing was getting behind President Trump and building a wall. So fast forward now, we have 20 million illegals in this country. And Lindsey Graham, that's because of you. You were trying to delegitimize President Trump 2017, 2018. You were cheering on Robert Mueller in that phony investigation. So this is the last man should be in Washington. And we have to move out. I'm standing up for us. I'm not going to sit here and hold my nose and vote for somebody that I know is purposely going to undo everything President Trump did. Because this country has put so much into getting where we are. We are, 250 years coming up next year, our birthday of this country. And so many patriots, gave their lives. Even here in the Low Country, you have some of the, per square mile, maybe the most patriotic of all the colonies. We have to carry on that legacy. This is on us now as a generation. And it's important that we shift to the next gen MAGA leader. And that's me. I've proven it. And I can tell you more about everything I've done.
Well, let's take a step back for just a moment, because you've already proven that you know some of the issues, at least locally here in Charleston, pretty well with just talking about the drive from Somerville. But walk it back for me. What is your family, I know because you've been around in New York and some other places as well. What's the family connection here to Charleston? And I know you've got a family here and you're raising your kids here. But talk to me about the connection to Charleston.
How did I come to God's country?
Yeah.
I married a Carolina girl. We got married almost 20 years ago on Johns Island here. And I met my wife. She grew up in Charlotte, kind of family had been in Carolinas for the last 300 years, but she was a ballet prodigy. So she went up to New York City at age 15, recruited for the School of American Ballet, joined the New York City Ballet Company, that's probably the most elite in the whole world, at 16, and was working up in New York myself. I come from a family of immigrants. My parents were the first to really go to college. And my generation, my siblings and I were the first to really speak English at home. They were Spanish, Italian, and on my mom's side, French, Canadian. And I call myself a pure-blooded deplorable. I come from the stock of people like many of the listeners here, did the dirty jobs, continue to do the dirty jobs, went off and fought the nation's war. My uncles were World War II heroes. They spoke French as their first language. They dropped behind enemy lines in occupied France, stormed the beaches of Normandy. My grandfather, the Spaniard, was in the Liberty ships. Some of you may know that the Liberty ships were even built here in Charleston. He was in the engine room on the Murmansk runs. So these were in the Merchant Marines. So my grandfather was at sea for 40 years. I have this kind of immigrant story where my parents ultimately met in Washington. They were the best and brightest of their generation. They were Kennedy. They came, they met at the National Institutes of Health. My father was actually in the military. He was a Vietnam vet, so he was doing service there. And my mom was a graduate. And they met, introduced by the parish priest, and I became one of 4 kids. I went K through 12 public education. We lived the majority of our time in Colorado and then Virginia and Maryland. So, from second grade on, I lived in Virginia and then Maryland. And my father ultimately was a professor of medicine at Johns Hopkins. So I went to MIT. I was blessed, by great parents who focused on education, but we were always merit-based. And but I could never leave the values of this kind of working class group when I went off to this elite college. And I saw America getting undone in real time at MIT. This is where they had the Manhattan Project, where so much of technology came from. And, to see kind of the globalization taking root then, I was an H. Ross Perot guy. And I really said, look, this is a problem. The sucking sound is going to get only louder. So I went off to University of Virginia School of Law, studied law. I was a Federalist Society, people know what that is, card-carrying member. I was twice elected the president at the University of Virginia School of Law. So that's probably the most conservative law faculty at the time. So I've been at this for 30 years as a true believer. And, we managed to come back to Carolina about 10 years ago, started up in Fort Mill. I like to say that my in-laws are there, and I say that they escaped communism and themselves and moved to Fort Mill. Of course, they were starting in Charlotte, Mecklenburg.
I knew there was a punchline in there somewhere. Yeah,
but hey, look, let's be real about Charlotte. Like my mother-in-law was a school teacher in the public schools there, and she's seeing. All you have to do is pick up the Charlotte Observer and just see the advocacy. And how does it end? With that terrible, Ukrainian emigre getting murdered. That's kind of the pervasive spirit, that liberalism where they let people out of jail. So look, this state has been a citadel of values, and we came here for the values, for God, family, and country. I literally came here to, we have 4 kids now, and I no longer make mother-in-law jokes. When you start having kids and they outnumber you, thank God for the grandparents. So, we live down here now in about 10 minutes from this studio in downtown Charleston, but this is where we've always wanted to be. I feel like God is present here. You can feel this almost tremor in the Low Country. It's a holy place. It really is a holy city. And after years of living in New York, you want to be around people who have your values.
Well, let's get to the nuts and bolts here, because you are you are the architect of Project 2025, which has had, especially from the left, people who are very critical of some of the things that are in the roadmap. I did see there's a number of trackers out there, because if we go back, Project 2025 was out, and at one point, the president was getting a lot of, candidate Trump was getting a lot of flack for what was written in there, and he had to come out and say, listen, it's not my project, it's not my plan, but here we are in 2025, and much of the stuff that happened that was written in Project 2025 is now being implemented federally. But again, panned widely from the left. And I wonder if you take any of those criticisms as being exaggerative, or just a difference of opinion.
Well, pretty much anything the left says is a massive exaggeration, if not flat out misinformation. But look, to back up, to Project 2025 was a coming together of the entire conservative movement, which I led from my position at the Heritage Foundation. I worked at the Heritage Foundation from 21, right after the Trump administration, to last year. But it was a plan to systematically make sure that the conservatives were able to help the president be ready day one to tackle this government. We had to get our arms around the federal government before it really extinguished us. So what I did with that was bring together 110 conservative groups and align our efforts and make us systematically prepare to retake the federal government. With the basic precept is that personnel is policy. All these lessons were drawn from my experience and that of others as an outsider coming into Washington. Look, I helped President Trump get elected in 2016. I was a volunteer attorney. I've done this for the last 30 years, working on campaigns. Right. I'm one of those guys who loves to smell of bumper stickers on fall mornings, who makes phone calls, who knocks on doors, who gets in the legal room, who runs into court and gets injunctions. That's what I did as a volunteer. And, President Trump getting into office, most people, our senior senator in South Carolina wanted nothing of him, right? I was on the other side. I was in Pennsylvania in the war room when Lindsey Graham was calling him all that terrible names. I was there making sure we won Pennsylvania and won the country. So Project 2025, I learned when I got into Washington in the Trump administration that we didn't have an effective team on the field, that we needed patriots from outside of the swamp, and we needed to tell them this is how the government works, and then we had to give them a roadmap.
Well, what do you say to the people who are afraid that Project 2025 and the Republicans' position since Trump's second election, what do you say to the folks on the left that say, well, Project 2025 wants to get rid of rights for LGBTQ couples, wants to get rid of abortion rights for women federally, wants to do all of these things that would roll back sort of the expansion of social issues and rights associated with them. I mean, is that the plan, to get rid of things like gay marriage?
Not at all. Okay. And so the first thing I would say, did you actually read it?
I did not read all 900
but not to
pages.
you, but like to a critic like that, you haven't even read it.
Right.
You've relied on this misinformation and all this, what the kids call gaslighting about it, which is essentially just saying false things about something. It ultimately did a great disservice to the left because, look, they put all their cards in to do this two-stage misinformation play. One was that it was President Trump's, and we did this independently of President Trump. Those of us who served before said, look, he's focused on winning. We have to make sure in the meantime that when he wins, he can roll. And so that was what we did. But, two, many of the things that they said, this misinformation play, they're just not there. There's no period passports. There's no of these kind of obscene characterizations of it. So what it is, though, is if you've been pleased with President Trump's term to date, 80% of that's coming out of our work. And, there are things that both sides should agree on. We have a $7 trillion federal government, and we're having problems with actually the airplanes flying right now. How is this even possible? Well, because of people like Lindsey Graham, they've been at the wheel for 30 years, and they've watched this thing disintegrate and sent all our money abroad to Israel, to Ukraine, to just foreign whatever, some of it making it back into their own campaign coffers. So Project 2025, no, it's not a threat. And what it is an actual bringing back the federal government to what it should be, of, by, and for the people. We're attacking the deep state, this administrative state of unelected bureaucrats in Washington who, right or left, they don't really care. It's them who make policy.
Well, I'm curious about the deep state because people use it and it's kind of a nebulous term, but I think folks have an idea of what that is. How do you define the deep state, and can people be involved in the deep state who are not liberals and rhinos? I mean, can conservatives and good-natured Republicans be a part of this problem that you refer to as the deep state?
Well, it's a political class, to be sure. And it's not just people in government. It's an amalgam, I would say, of moneyed interest. It's of, big universities, pretty much anything you start with big and follows, like big tech, big pharma, big banking, the mega industries. This kind of comes into this money swamp of, and, I don't think actually fair-minded people on the left and the right are really part of it. I do believe it's kind of a uniparty creation. But to be sure, it's insulated from the people. It's an outgrowth of what we call the progressive era, which started 100 years ago under President Wilson. And the precept was, look, us common people, we don't know how to rule, manage our own lives. There should be a select group of experts who can ordain life for the rest of us. And so they took decisions out of the hands of the people and put it in this unelected bureaucracy.
Sure.
And that's essentially the contempt of the whole thing. When the civil service was stood up in 1883 in the Pendleton Act, 10% of those federal jobs were protected, supposed to be immunized. We had graft and everything. In the late 19th century, Teapot Dome scandal and Tammany Hall. But move to today, 99.7% of the federal workforce is immunized from the president being able to hire and fire them. And that's the problem, because under our Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 1, the president, the executive power of the United States is vested in a president, period. So basically, the buck stops on the president's desk for a reason. He, and one day she, should be in charge of the bureaucracy, be able to fire people. Because anybody who's ever worked in the business knows if the only thing you can do is give pay raises to people, you're going to have the business running against you.
Well, let's talk about the Constitution for a moment, because one of the key aspects to why our country has been so successful is our federalist system. We got state governments, and we got the federal government. I'm curious how you think those two sets of governments should interact, knowing that we have a lot of beef federally, and depending on who's at the top of the federal government, with half of the states at a time. Whether if it's a Democrat in the Oval Office, they got problems with the red states. If it's a Republican in the Oval Office, they got problems with the blue states. So how do you think this federal system should interact with each other?
Well, the problem is the federal system's just ballooned out of control, right? It was supposed to be a limited government of enumerated powers. And what happened over the last 100 years, because of the liberal Supreme Courts, because of kind of the progressive politicians, and the growth of this deep state, this military-industrial complex, the universities, is that it just amassed all this power. And even where it didn't have the statutory authority to do things, it started exerting pressure on states and localities to change their ways or take away federal funding. So what's the ultimate solution? Look, power needs to be brought down to the people. It's always the conservative point of view is we're best exercising it when you can actually interact with a person. So devolving power from the federal level to the states. But, the consequent thing is like the states have to step up. We need better management in Colombia, and this is where I think a lot of the movement for Doge and Doge SC, and you see even at the local level, accountability. Like that, the problem with excessive government is pervasive through local, state, and federal. It's just a thing by its nature that expands. No bureaucrats ever said, you know what, I want to put myself out of a job. I'm going to do this program and actually finish it.
Well, that's a principled statement that federal government and state government should kind of have their own spheres, and that is, conservatives often will say that issues should be handled at the lowest level possible, home rule, all of that. But I wonder how that logic squares or that principle squares with things like the president sending troops into cities, or I think Lindsey Graham at one point had introduced a bill to make a federal abortion ban. I just wonder if you see those things as being compatible with the idea that each state should kind of make their own rules.
Well, I was shocked at Senator Graham for introducing such a thing. I think he's completely haywire. We just sent that decision down to the people in the states, and here the man turns around and tries to interject it 2 weeks before the election. You have to question what team this guy's playing on in many ways. But that's an example of his overreach. But with respect to home rule as a general proposition, yes, the president regaining control of the cities, that's ultimately the backstop of the federal government. That's the rebellion clause where you have progressive cities, and we see it now in Chicago, Portland, Oregon. You can go up to Boston, go everywhere in between.
So you think it's constitutionally acceptable?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, we joined the union for limited reasons, but one of them is like, if, the state can take matters into its own hands, if they're being invaded like Texas did, if the federal government under Biden's not going to come in and enforce the border, and Gramnesty, our Senator Gramnesty is not the one to do that. But two, we're like the federal courthouse is under siege in Portland. You better believe they should come in and do it. And this is a problem with the first Trump administration and Lindsey Graham. Look, they didn't have the right people who were forcing it. The president had some really bad picks. Bill Barr, who Lindsey Graham was 100% behind, said, no, you can't go into Portland and shut this down. Those people in Washington State who were trying to call an autonomous zone, put down that rebellion. They were doing this 100 years ago, to be sure the federal government was, but that's because there is this uniparty, and Lindsey Graham is part of the deep state. He is our own deep state here in South Carolina, and that's why I'm standing up to get rid of him. He's the guy who put Chris Wray in power. He voted for him. He protected him. When Robert Mueller was going after the president, Lindsey Graham threatened President Trump and said, don't you put a hand on Robert Mueller. And what happened was that President Trump was hobbled. So this guy, with friends like Lindsey, who needs enemies? And that's what's so dangerous about this man.
Well, I want to keep challenging you on your support of the Constitution, which we should all be in support of the Constitution as Americans here. But one of the things that's recently come up, and you can tell me if you support this or not, is this idea of getting rid of birthright citizenship. That's constitutionally enshrined in the 14th Amendment. Is that something that, and if it should be done away with, shouldn't that go through a process of basically another amendment?
Well, enshrined, again, that's your interpretation of the law. Certainly, if you look historically, if a diplomat, for example, a French diplomat came over and they had a baby when this person was ambassador to the United States, that little kid did not become a citizen of the United States, But over time, I think that the incidence was relatively low, and it was easier for people to kind of process it. And what Democrats and progressives have done are exploit loopholes. So, yes, the birthright citizenship is being tested at the Supreme Court, and that's.
Do you think it should be removed?
I think yes, it's definitely. We can't have birth tourism anymore. Who knows how many Americans there are, floating around the rest of the globe who came here and overloaded, number one, our health system, and then walk out with a passport. It's absurd. And no other country in the world recognizes this. Look, we need an ordered sort of immigration system. But number one, that means shutting down the border, as Tom Homan, who, by the way, Project 2025, I worked with Tom on getting those chapters and the book in place, one of which was putting federal troops on the border. Look, we need comprehensive attention on immigration, the illegal immigration, and part of it, the birthright so-called citizenship has to go. This is just unmanageable. And these people are not Americans. Anchor babies are not how anyone intended to build this country.
Well, let me talk about foreign wars for a moment. This is a point that really differentiates you and Senator Lindsey Graham right now. You want to end endless wars. How do you do that in places like Ukraine and places like Israel? Give me your stance on both of those countries and their current conflicts.
Well, one is supporting President Trump and not getting in his way. Look, he is a great peacemaker. I think he's already settled 7 wars rather. But what Lindsey Graham does is every time President Trump puts a peace predicate in place, this man goes and upsets the apple cart. How do you get it? So number one, getting out of President Trump's way and actually supporting him. 2, let's not send over $300 billion, and let's actually account for where that money went. And I wouldn't be running off to Ukraine every weekend. The guy, understand that Lindsey Graham works 3 days a week in the Senate, and that he has a 4-day weekend every week where he wings off to Ukraine or Paris or wherever else. And what he doesn't do is confirm judges and help the president with his agenda. To the contrary, he went to Ukraine, famously on the eve of that spider attack, and told the world, hey, President Trump wants to stop this, but remember us in the United States, we have 2 other branches of government, and I have a veto-proof bill that's going to pass the Senate that's going to handcuff the Russians. So this is a man who's actually standing in the way of peace and completely out of line. He should have been arrested essentially for that interference. So one, it's just to stop Lindsey Graham. The man, removing him would actually help world peace.
What do you do about Israel, though? I mean, Ukraine, what I kind of hear you saying about Ukraine is we should let the Europeans and Ukraine deal with Ukraine as however Trump wants to deal with it. But Israel is a bit of a different situation. What do you do about Israel? Let's say, even if you were president, how would you handle the Israel conflict?
Look, I'm America first and not Israel first, not Ukraine first. We always have to ask what is in the foreign policy interest of the United States citizen. How are we helping the people back home thrive and be safe? Israel has a special relationship. The Jewish people, we supported the growth of the state, but we cannot be dragged into Israel's wars. We're not letting the Israel tail wag the American dog. And Lindsey is apparently completely compromised. If you ever listen to him talk about Israel, as he did here in Columbia at the GOP gala, he spent 20 minutes berating the entire audience about Israel and saying things like, if we turn our back on Israel, God's going to turn its back on us. I don't remember that part of the Bible. How do you solve Israel? One, we have to limit our foreign aid. They're the biggest recipient of U.S. foreign aid for a country that, is 9 million people. Meanwhile, we deflect so much of the president's time into this. The Abraham Accords, you have to let that happen, and that means kind of staying out of the way. Look, Israel is various factions of politicals going on there. Benjamin Netanyahu, he's been in power 30 years. Lindsey's been in power 30 years. Generally, it's a bad proposition when somebody's been in power for 30 years. And so I think, one, it's getting out of the way of Israel, but 2, it's not this reflexive, we're just going to send money. We're not, we are actually degrading our ability to be safe here at home because we're moving Patriot missile batteries to Israel, which are in turn being moved to Ukraine. And various other defensive positions and technology.
Well, before I let you wrap up and give your final sort of closing pitch to voters, I want to challenge you for a moment to find something that you and President Trump disagree on that isn't Lindsey Graham.
Well, that's a tough one, but I would say I'm very hopeful about what President Trump's done directionally. Everything's kind of moving out, but some things are going a lot further and some things are kind of stuck in the starting gate. And the big question, the issue I have is the Department of Justice. Let's see some orange jumpsuits now, okay? One, I'm for full release of the Epstein files. People send Republicans to Washington to get the truth. We want transparency. We are adults here back at home. We can handle the truth. And if I get to Washington with the people's help, I will tell you the truth. I will tell you the UAPs. I saw them myself flying around here in Charleston. Like, tell us what's going on in the skies. Tell us what's going on in the Epstein files. Tell us what happened in 2020. Tell us what happened with COVID. And that's what I'm going to do, release. So, the DOJ, I think Pam Bondi is a nice woman, but she is not using those powers. And justice delayed is justice denied.
Wow.
Get at it.
A lot of people have said that they'll release the Epstein files on both sides of the aisle, and then it seems like they get to Washington, and all of a sudden they find something out that convinces them that for whatever reason we don't need to see them. And of course, some people say, well, there are no files, there is no list, but it seems like this is an issue that is going to be kind of a problem for Republicans in power right now. So I'm going to take your word on it. You say it.
You have the secretary. Well, you have the secretary. Well, yes.
Yeah.
Play it back because I'm going full release. Okay.
All right.
And that's what I say. If you ever boo me, Senator Dans, and you turn your back on me, I would say, you know what? Maybe I'm not doing this job right. Someone else should do it. I am here to work for the people. You're my boss. I'm asking you for this job. I am reporting to the people of South Carolina first. This is who you're sending to Washington. So, yeah, you have every right to be upset with a senator who doesn't get you the answers. But I've proven in life that I'm a fighter, and I've done this. So, with respect to Epstein, you got the Secretary of Commerce is his next door neighbor. Howard Lutnick lived next door to him for 20 years. In fact, I think he bought his house from Epstein. So it's weird when he's literally on the shoulder of Donald Trump sneering and laughing, and when Trump says they're not going to release the files.
All right. Well, I think we could talk about this forever. Honestly, there's so many things we could talk about because the federal government is so large and there's so many things that need to be addressed. But let's wrap this up. Give the voters, Republican voters, your final pitch. Why should they vote for Paul Dans 2026?
This is your Senate seat. Take it back. I'm here to get it for you. I've worked in Washington for 6 years, but more than that, I've worked for President Trump for 10. If Lindsey had his way, there never would have been a President Trump. Our union is at a crossroads right now. We need to reform this government. I wrote the greatest conservative plan to reform this government to bring us back to a government of by and for the people. I've proven my ability to fight. I've been at every major Trump battle. In 2020, I was there. I'm an election integrity guy. I saw what happened in Georgia. I will fight. I promise you that. And what do you have to lose? Ultimately, we have to pass this to the next generation. I'm a dad of 4. I'm an MIT grad, University of Virginia. I live right here in Charleston. You know where to find me, and I want to answer to you. Look, I have a stake in this country. I have 4 kids, and they're the future of South Carolina, along with your kids, along with everybody who hopes one day to have kids. Look, this generation can't even buy a house until they're age 38 because of people like Lindsey Graham, who spent the last 32 years in Washington racking up $30 trillion in debt. The system's broken. You have to take this man off the watch. It's time for Lindsey to go.
All right. Paul Dans, thanks.
Thank you, Nick.